Oh yeah, it's that time again.
Yes, it is.
Welcome to the Precision Teaching Podcast. I'm Rick Cabina, along with my co-host, Doug Kostowitz.
Yes, I'm here again. I never get to introduce myself, but I'm here.
Well, that's the way it works, Doug. You are the co-host. I am the host. I introduce you.
Okay. Fair enough.
We have... Well, it's another exciting show lined up for everyone today.
Mm-hmm.
We are coming at you towards... the podcast always comes out towards the end of the month, so this can bring us right into our first announcement, which is ABAI. No, ABAI.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are, however we put that, have/are attending
Okay, there you go.
ABAI. And it would have been nice to make it there this year because we probably could have done some live interviews, but maybe next year.
Yeah.
We got the PT conference coming up in November. Maybe we'll head up there too. That's still in the questionable category as far as your host is considering it. How about your plans, Doug?
I think I'm going to go.
All right, well, if you're going to go, I might have to go. So we'll have to see how that works out.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of PT folks at the ABAI conference. The I totally screws me up now that's on there because I'm so used to calling it just ABA.
How long was it ABA?
Well, the very first thing, it was MABA, I think, which was Midwestern Association. Then it quickly, or I don't know how long it was, it transformed to ABA, and now it's ABAI to talk about the international nature for our viewers who aren't familiar with that. Yeah, Association of Behavior Analysis International. I think they should have just called it IABA, since everything is an I something.
Oh.
Let's get into our first email question. This month, we didn't have any precision teaching questions, but we did get an interesting question from F.B. Hinner. F.B. Hinner.
This is a good question.
Pretty clever, right?
Yes.
But F.B. asks, Dear Rick, who are your favorite Transformers? And, of course, this is given to Doug and I. Well, that is a pretty damn good question, FB. Who are our favorite Transformers? Well, I have to tell you what, Doug, after giving this considerable thought, and it's an interesting question because the movies are out, but you and I are of the age that we watched the original series on TV back when there were
original toys.
Yeah, there were 4 channels, right? There was 3 public channels, and then, well, your 3 network channels, and then PBS. And if I had to answer this question, I always liked, this is probably low-hanging fruit, but Optimus Prime of the Autobots was always my favorite because he stood for virtue, he was always the leader, and he would always seem to save the day, or he would launch some kind of plan that would save the day. Plus, he was a cool semi-truck. So that's who I liked. What about you, Doug?
Well, I'm going to drop some comparisons here that some of us out in the audience might not know about, but you might. I was big into Transformers, but with the toys and the cartoons as yourself. My favorite was Jetfire.
Ah, Jetfire.
I don't know if you remember, but I was also a big Robotech fan. First Robotech. And he reminded me a lot of the planes that transformed into mechs. So, yeah, he was my favorite. And then my second favorite, because it's kind of like a favorite B, was Soundwave, because I loved all the little cassettes that popped out.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Yeah, Soundwave was cool. You know, there was this one guy I liked who wasn't, his name was Jazz, and he turned into a sports car, and he was kind of cool. And there were a couple other Autobots. The Starscream from the movies was a pretty sweet one.
Yeah. Well, Jazz was in the movies, too.
You know, I don't remember seeing him in the movies, was he?
He was the lieutenant in the first one that got ripped in half. I hope I'm not spoiling anything for anybody.
It's too late now. If they haven't seen it, they probably don't care.
Well, Megatron takes him out in that kind of climatic scene. He was driving around in the white. He was a what the heck was he? I think it was like a Porsche 911.
Sweet. I'm going to have to watch that again and look for Jazz.
Well, you'll see him. He dances around, does the break dancing.
Huh.
So that was Jazz.
I completely missed that. Or I probably saw it and just forgot it.
Yeah. So, yeah, Jetfire and Soundwave.
All right. Well, there you go, FB Hunter. We answered your question. And why don't you write us back and let us know who your favorite Transformers are. Well, Doug, that was a penetrating question. Difficult to answer, but we pulled it off with style, which I think, by the way, was Jazz's motto. If you're going to do it with style. Or something like that.
That I don't know about, but I'll kind of just accept it and move on.
Yeah, just defer to me. I'm a Jazz fan, so it's got to be right.
Yeah.
We have some interesting science news. There's always there's like 100 things that I could pick, and I always try to pick something that I would think would be interesting to our listenership. And this is a recent article that came out of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And I wanted to share this one because it talks about, well, the title is Behavioral Therapy Can Help Kids with Tourette Disorder. And this is it's a behavioral treatment. And what they did here in this study, if you read just if you don't read the actual article, but you just read what I have here in the Science News webpage, they're quoting a few people, and they're like, I think this is groundbreaking, and clinically we have really powerful evidence, and they go on, and they're very excited about this treatment or this intervention. And I always like it when our parent science, which is behavior analysis, when people recognize it. Oftentimes, whenever we hear about behavior analysis, it's always like, oh, behavior analysis is dead and nobody does that anymore, and something negative if it's from someone not in our field. But we have many... What were you going to say?
I just said making automatons.
Yeah. We have lots of good... Well, I won't say lots. We have a science, and our science, I'm not going to apologize, our science is well-grounded, and we have been doing good things for good people for quite a bit of time. When we talk about the applied side, like applied behavior analysis, so to speak, there's all types of different interventions. But this was a nice... I thought this was really nice because it captured something that has been around for quite some while. Are you familiar with habit reversal, Doug, and what they've done before in the past?
No, I'm not familiar with the previous research. However, looking at it, it follows sort of the replacement behavior literature. So not so much habit reversal, but looking at the article and what they talked about here, it fits right in with replacement behaviors. Yeah,
so habit reversal it's a multi-component type of intervention. So it's not just one thing. But I remember reading quite some time ago, they did a study on kids with EBD, emotional and behavior disorders, and what they did is when these kids were going to get aggressive, they would say, okay, when you feel like you're going to have an aggressive exchange with someone, do the turtle. And the turtle was where they relax their muscles, they pull their arms and legs close to their body, they put their head down, and the idea is this response is going to compete with this other type of behavior that you don't want to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool. And Azrin and Nunn, those again behavior analysts, they came up with this big habit reversal. And a lot of I was pleased to see that some of that literature now is being made. Lots of people are looking at it, but this article goes on to talk about how they use habit reversal. And habit reversal, for those of you, if you're interested in it, just look it up on Wikipedia or even go to a book and you can see the different components to it. There's different ways of doing this, but like I said, it's a multi-component type of intervention. In children who have Tourette disorder, you probably are aware of, people will talk about Tourette's, and what immediately comes to mind is a person saying something bad. And with Tourette disorder, this can be very socially stigmatizing because, if you're in a classroom and you're moving on and whatever your tic is, and the tics aren't necessarily saying something bad. It could be anything. It could be some kind of a facial gesture. It can be a contortion, sticking your tongue out, blinking, whatever that behavior is. It can draw attention to you very negatively, and of course, that can have all kinds of bad effects for kids. But when they talk about Tourette disorder, kids can feel it coming on, and the idea is when you do whatever the tic is, that's a relief. And they use an analogy of a person who has an urge for cigarette smoking. If you feel that urge to take that puff, when you take that deep drag, that relieves that urge. So this behavior therapy that they do, which is habit reversal, they took kids, and this is a randomized controlled study, which, again, if you can pull those off, people look at that as that's the gold standard for research. Right. And that's what they did. They took students and they put them in these different groups. And what they found, to make a long story short, that the students who had the habit reversal, they just call it behavioral training, 53% of those students were greatly improved, whereas the other group, which was just getting counseling, only 19% of those students that got the intervention reported better outcomes. And the study shows, they still talk about using medication as the first line of treatment, but they say that yes, this behavior therapy can work. It's great. Let's do more of it. And it's a nice study.
Well, I know in looking at the study, they didn't control for drugs, but even numbers of kids in each group were taking medication at the time of the study. So that could be something that's fleshed out in future research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Doug and I read the original article. We try to do that when we can. And this, they're calling it treatment. There are some future things they can do, and I think they even say in the original article some of the things that they'd like to also look at. But it's good to hear that they are going to move forward. And again, we live in a society where if you have some type of psychological problem or behavioral problem, or call it what you will, most people are going to say, okay, what's the drug that's going to fix you?
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that is just that's where we ended up, that we have so many kids that are drugged, that so many, well, not just kids, but everybody that's drugged so greatly in our society. It saddens me to think about that, because we have this wonderful science that has been around for years, that does good things. That, again, I'm not saying there's no place for drugs, but what if we tried to say, all right, what are the behavioral interventions out there, and can we look at those first versus, okay, let's immediately go to the drug treatment, and that's the way that we fix everybody, so to speak?
What's the medical model that's prevalent for our society of treatment? But I also wanted to talk just briefly. We had a podcast a few months ago on private events, and this is if I'm reading it and understanding it correctly, this is another way that teaches individuals to be able to recognize private events, thoughts, feelings, and urges. And I wonder if there isn't something there of counting that might not be used in that way.
Yeah. When you're saying that, I couldn't help, when I read this article over, I thought the same exact thing, that here we have people, they have to recognize these urges, and that is indeed a private event.
Right.
How else might we might intervene with this type of program? You're right. And again, Skinner said that being able to do these types of interventions completely fall within behavior analysis. It's not just, it's observable to a person, but just because I can't observe something that's going on inside of you doesn't mean we can't come up with some type of intervention. And it also doesn't mean that private event falls outside of the bounds of our science of behavior.
Well, I got a question for you then. So let's say that we teach a student or a participant to recognize an urge and replace, so it's becoming, and I don't mean to get technical, but that urge is an antecedent for some Tourette-related behavior. So we teach it as an antecedent for a competing behavior that's more socially acceptable. If we can teach them to recognize that urge, could we or could we not go back one more step? What was the antecedent that led to that urge? And then go back a few steps before that so that we can even help them prior to. I don't know, that's just my thinking. If that's something you think is interesting.
Well, if that prior whatever happens to be emanating from a person's biology, so to speak, we might not be able to observe it. There might not be something that is readily observable. For example, once the air conditioner kicks on, now I feel this urge. So some environmental event is serving to bring this on. If it's something that you have these people that something happens that we're not quite aware of, then it'd be difficult to figure out what that prior antecedent is.
Right.
I mean, if the urge... What's that?
It might be possible. There might be some situations that are environmental that now we can recognize what sets the antecedent for the urge, that we could even intervene at a further temporally earlier in that contingency.
Yeah. There are lots of things like that would be very positive. The other thing that I noticed about this article is that they say behavioral interventions, and they say it's promising, they just haven't been evaluated in large-scale controlled trials. That's important because while our field, by and large, does lots of single-case research design, and that's what most of us are comfortable with, being able to do the randomized controlled trials and show, hey, look, here's our technology, and here's how it works if you want to do these large-scale studies. I'm not saying that our field shift towards that as our main way of uncovering information about the world and nature, but it doesn't hurt to do these types of trials because in terms of funding and lots of other good political outcomes, these randomized controlled trials mean something to lots of people. That's another positive outcome of this, that, hey, there's something that we have. They did this large-scale trial, this controlled trial, and sure enough, they found positive results. So a very nice study, very positive. Always good to see that our things that are based on a behavioral view can indeed, when you look at them through these randomized controlled trials, have very powerful effects. All right, let's move to our article review. The article that we're reviewing today it's from Remedial and Special Education. It's from 2004, and this is a meta-analysis. And this meta-analysis looked at what's called the drill ratio research. And I thought this would be a good article for us to review because part of what a lot of people in precision, some people I shouldn't say, do in precision teaching is they will practice something to fluency. Or if they don't practice, if they're doing any type of instruction, this will still be of interest to them. This article looks at, if you think about, you've heard the terms frustration level, instructional level, independent level. You're familiar with those terms, yes?
You asking me or
I'm asking you.
I'm familiar with those terms.
Okay. How are they defined? And this article talks about some of that. The bottom line is this: an instructional level is a level where, when you have material and you're instructing students, if there's a ratio of knowns to unknowns, the more knowns that you have in there, the better able students are going to learn. What this research also shows is, guess what? Kids, when they ask for preferences, kids prefer information or instruction that is at their instructional level. Now, there is that research out there. There's quite a few studies that show, hey, it's good to have an instructional level when you're teaching someone. And most of this research, when I was looking at it, deals with academics. So it's not necessarily getting into all of the things that we might instruct. This is, as you would imagine, this research is done with academics, so they're looking at academics. They also have something which is called the drill ratio. I don't particularly like that term drill. I prefer practice. Drill just has way too many negative connotations. When you say drill, what do you think about when you hear that word? I'm asking you, Doug.
You're asking me. Let's see.
Pay attention.
I was paying attention. Drill is...
What comes to mind? I say drill, and you think of...
boring.
Okay, what else?
Repetitive.
Good. But think about drill. What are some other words that have that in there? Drill. Think military, Doug.
Oh, okay. Just drilling and
drill
practicing.
Instructor.
Yeah. Oh, drill instructor. Oh.
And what does the drill instructor do?
He yells at everybody.
Yeah. He yells at people. And he makes you do things over and over again, as you were pointing out, the repetition. Drill just has it just brings up too many. You think about kids sitting at a table, mindlessly doing their math facts. They hate it. And you can find lots of articles out there where people just excoriate drill. And they'll say things like, that's just rote practice, and kids are going to hate. They're going to hate their school and all of these bad things. And if that's what drill is, I get it. That's not how practice should be done. If you're doing good practice, practice is work, but practice done well doesn't have to be mindless. It can have a goal. It can be fun. Kids can see what their progress is. So I guess I'm going off on a tangent here, but I don't like the word drill. And those are some of the reasons why I don't like it. So I never use that word, but it is the title of this article. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go with it. But the idea with this article is, what's this drill ratio? If you're going to practice, if we say practice ratio, what should you do? Could you find different ratios that would help kids benefit? So you have the acquisition stage, and they talk about this too here. There's different stages of learning. they talked about the acquisition stage, the proficiency stage, which would come after acquisition. So with acquisition, the goal is you want people to be accurate. Then with the proficiency stage, you want them to be fluent. Then from there, you want them to maintain the behavior, which is called the maintenance stage. And then you go to generalization, and the last stage they call adaptation.
Application.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, that's what you'd want is application, but they use the term, they call it adaptation, and sometimes I've actually seen it called adaption. So they use these different terms there for those stages of learning. But you're right, you want people to be applying this knowledge to whatever. But these drill ratios that they look at, they call them drill tasks. And they say, okay, we have a literature out there, and what is the best way that students would benefit if you have a task? Let's say it's reading, and you want students to benefit from this drill ratio. According to the research that they could find, what would be the best ratio in terms of items, known items to unknown items? And they looked at a number of these different ratios. And they looked at 70 to 85% that are known, and anywhere from 15 to 30% would be unknown. They looked at 50% that are unknown, and 50% are known. And then I think they had some higher drill ratios.
90% to 10%.
Yeah, 90 and 10.
And then below 50% known.
Yes. Yeah, so there were, 4 of them, basically.
4 groups, yes.
4 groups. So they did this meta-analysis, and the other thing, too, I'd point out, is when they looked at where they found people were using these drill ratios, people were doing them in acquisition and in proficiency, which I thought that was kind of interesting because it makes sense to me why they'd be doing it in proficiency, but I guess in accuracy or the acquisition stage, they're doing it maybe to firm it up even more. But I don't know. I guess that they're doing it in the acquisition to help students become more firm. So, in a nutshell, what they found out doing this meta-analysis is that when you're less than 50%, the mean effect size was about 0.5. And 0.5 is what in meta-analysis terms, Doug, in terms of effects?
It means that it moved.
No, I don't mean that. I mean in terms of the, what's that rated as?
Trying to think.
It's moderate?
Yeah, moderate.
And the other ones, 50 to 60%, 0.65 is, 0.85, 1.22 for 70 to 85, and 90. And when you start getting to those are strong effects.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the exact numbers in those cutoffs for the meta-analyses. I think they're similar to like correlations, like 0 to 2, maybe 2 to 4. There's something like that. I'll have to look that.
Yeah,
we'll have to look that up.
Very, very similar to those breakdowns.
Yeah, the lower you get, the far there can be no effect. But there's an effect on all of these, which is positive. But what they conclude is that if you're at 50 to 60, 70 to 80, and 90, then you're having very strong effects. Now, what does that mean? And this is something I found interesting. When people talk about in our field, okay, let's take kids and should we instruct them? Like, let's say they don't know a lot, where they're having lots of unknowns to knowns. You would have what's called a learning picture on a standard acceleration chart, which would be a JAWS crossover. So you have the corrects going up and the errors going down, and they cross over at some point. And people say, hey, that's really great. Kids are learning. Versus another way of doing instruction is, well, let's get kids accurate. Let's provide them instruction, and then let's do some types of practice. Some people are very adamant that what you do is it's okay and it should be desirable in many situations to have those types of learning pictures where there's lots of unknowns and kids are learning. This article would suggest that if you, the latter, what I talked about, teaching the students something, firming it up, firming whatever it is, and then practicing, that has a very positive effect in terms of learning. Now, it's not definitive, but it would suggest that that second model, which is a model that I do with, I mean, that's the model that I teach in college. If you're going to teach somebody something, for example, with reading, go ahead and use a good program, for example, something like direct instruction that's going to do great at firming kids up. And in some cases, kids can almost become, well, they can become fluent with that information. But then if you're going to practice something deliberately, then you can do that and monitor it with precision teaching, make decisions, and move on. So this article, yeah, go ahead.
I would just wanted to respond to what you were saying, because it's interesting, because of a couple kids that I've done some reading fluency work, and these are passages that are at their instructional level based on their ability to read between under 150 correct words per minute based on your one article in 2003. But the interesting thing is a few of these kids my goal was reading fluency, so I was moving them towards that proficiency level, and they went towards the aim at 200 with 2 or less correct, or 200 with 2 or less errors. Their corrects and incorrects both increased, and I didn't deal with the incorrects right away. I got the corrects up to the speed, and then once I did that, I dealt with the incorrects, and the incorrects dropped off, but the speed no longer increased. So it was kind of I was dealing with speed kind of first in this case. Not to say what I did was right. I'm just saying that the 2 students I'm thinking about built their speed first, and then we dealt with the incorrects. They didn't fall off as they moved, as they increased their speed. So those words were still unknown, even with error correction. They were just building their speed through the roof, and then I had to deal with the incorrects eventually. But then that slowed their speed down. But it didn't slow their speed, it kind of plateaued.
This study doesn't talk a lot about, because it's a meta-analysis, they don't get a lot into those types of effects, but your experience and mine too, and probably others out there, is that when you pay attention to incorrects, some of those incorrects can really be buggers, if I could use that word. Yeah, I can use that word. This is a family-friendly podcast, right? Buggers isn't a bad word. But
be trouble.
Pardon me?
They can be trouble.
Yes. They can be troubled. The implications for it would be, I would like to see this literature, and I wonder how they do address errors. And are there more effective ways of dealing with errors? What was telling about this, which they talk about, when they talk about it in here, is the author was surprised he could only come up with 13 studies. And, what does that say? I mean, I'm always surprised that anybody does practice. When I review most of the literature, almost everything is just based on acquisition. And you don't see many people practicing. And this study does indeed, it confirms my view that we just don't do enough practice in our field, period. And you and I are looking at things and saying, okay, not only are practice important, but let's look at those errors. Oftentimes you don't see, you and I are probably sound like broken records, but we're going to keep on saying the same thing. You should always include your incorrects there, because if you don't, you really don't know the true path of that behavior. You just look at the corrects, it might look like it's going up and things are good, but by ignoring those errors, you're doing a very big disservice to the student. A couple other tidbits from this article is what they found when you have good drill ratios is not only do students prefer that, but they look at the instructional level that and a drill ratio that increases time on task. In terms of engagement, students who are doing more, that's another benefit of having students who are doing this.
Yeah, makes sense. The more that you can do, the more that you will do.
Yeah.
And they actually start off in the article and say that kids with special needs, if they're taught at their instructional level, they do more things.
Yeah.
So, and then those are all really good outcomes for identifying the proper material for the individual, rather than fitting the individual into whatever the current curriculum is.
Yeah. That's a good point. Whether the students are with or without disabilities, this applies to every student. And if you are working with a student with disabilities, I always think that if you have a student with disabilities, especially someone who's behind, you have to start off with good ratios because think of all the frustration that student has already encountered because they couldn't learn something. Why not give them instruction that is going to be as positive and powerful as you can, because the more engagement you get, just good things are going to happen.
Right.
All right, well, this article is up on the website for those of you who would like to download it. It's a good article to read. Hope you enjoyed it like we did. Now, let's move on. We have, as usual, another excellent interview with Dr. Susan Malmquist. I would like to welcome Dr. Susan Malmquist to the Precision Teaching Podcast. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am glad that we have a chance to talk on the podcast tonight. We're recording right before ABA, and I know this is a busy time for you, so I appreciate you eking out some time to talk to me and talk to our audience tonight.
I'm really happy to talk with you and talk about one of my favorite subjects, precision teaching, and excited to go to San Antonio for the conference.
Why don't we start off by telling the audience, how did you get involved in precision teaching? Maybe talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. As you know, we discussed, I actually did my undergraduate work at Western Michigan University, and that was my introduction to behavior analysis. And as part of that, I was actually urged to go to the University of Oregon to study direct instruction with Wes Becker, who was there at the time. And in doing my doctoral work, really became interested in instructional design. And I was interested in looking at ways that we could harness the power of behavior analysis to teach a diverse range of learners. And one of my requirements for my PhD was to do an internship. And the only internship that I could find that really had a focus in behavior analysis and was consistent with my training happened to be at Morningside Academy in Seattle. And I knew a little bit about Morningside from the Association for Behavior Analysis, but when I went up and I interviewed there, I saw what a great fit that would be. And honestly, while I had read about precision teaching and some of the work of Ogden Lindsley, it was really at Morningside where I really saw the power of precision teaching to change the lives of children and provide appropriate instruction and keep expectations high. So that was really where I got my feet wet as a precision teacher.
When you were at Morningside, who was or what was your role there?
I actually had a number of different roles that I served. The first thing that I did was actually, as I mentioned, my school psychology internship. And that was the first year that I was there. And then I stayed on and I was in a psychology role. And as sort of assessment coordinator, but then also in an administrative role. And just with the way that Morningside is designed as a laboratory school, we all also taught as well. So I would teach classes in study skills and served as a curriculum lead for writing instruction, for example, and would do some of the weekly teacher training seminars that were such a critical part of the success of that model. And so it was really sort of part administrator, part teacher, part kind of, the evaluation system development. And that was kind of what brought me there, was to design. Kent Johnson and I designed a multi-level assessment system at Morningside, with precision teaching being at the core of the system. And that was something that I did at Morningside.
Well, that sounds very interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about your multi-level assessment? I'm assuming precision teaching was involved, and you maybe did some, CBM and some other parts to it?
Yes, actually, what we found was that part of the Morningside model is a focus on being able to catch learners up who were behind, rather than explaining the problems as being due to internal traits of the learner, and saying things such as, well, this child has attention deficit disorder, of course he can't pay attention, or this child has a learning disability in reading, of course she can't read. What we did was we actually looked at the factors that were within our control, and would actually focus on trying to make more than 1 year's growth in a year's time, which is one of the tenets of the Morningside model at the catch-up level. And what we found was that we really needed to have a reliable and valid system to do that. The measures that are widely available, if you look at sort of published tests, for example, it's very difficult to be able to make that statement and do it in such a way where it accurately captures the student learning. And so what we did was we designed our own system. And at the heart of the system was the daily measurement, which formed the micro level of the assessment system. And with that, it was the many, many decisions that teachers make every day that impact their learning within a data-based decision-making model. And so that would be the daily and weekly measures that would let us know how the students were learning in a way that we could have measures that were incredibly sensitive to growth, high impact and leading to important decisions, but they would really pick up small changes in behavior. What we found was that we wanted to see how well other layers of assessment, things that we might add in, if we added in a meta level and a macro level, how precision teaching would actually predict the outcomes at those levels. And so then the meta level would include more weekly measurement. And that actually became, I think two of the primary examples were curriculum-based measures. And that was something that I had training in at the University of Oregon, and studied with Mark Shin and Roland Good and folks there. And what we did was we incorporated those measures in a weekly measurement framework and designed portfolios for learners as well, to then ensure that what we were doing, we knew that the precision teaching was effective for that given learner, that we were picking the right pinpoints, we were looking at things in a component composite analysis in a way that made sense. And then finally, it led to the macro level of assessment, which is considered to be more high stakes assessment. So things like the Iowa Test of Basic Skills or the Woodcock-Johnson, but also now our state exams that are so critical in terms of documenting student learning. Mm-hmm. Those would be measures that we would incorporate annually. And so we found that they were much, much less sensitive to growth, but considered important in terms of the stakeholders who we were communicating to be able to demonstrate that the students were learning and making progress in a way that was where we can communicate to a broad audience. Really having all three of those levels really led to increases in student learning, because we were really in a hands-on fashion able to make database decisions, and it gave the teachers such a degree of confidence in what they were doing, that they knew that they were instructing in a given way because it was actually working, rather than they were just going lesson by lesson in a prescribed program that was given to them or had been adopted by the school or by a particular district, or that they were really teaching at an instructional level for the students, and the students could see their progress. They could see it visually and in a number of different formats. We also found that the parents loved this system.
When you were at the meta level, were you using the weekly standard acceleration chart?
We actually did. And what we would do is we would use curriculum-based measurement. And so we focused on oral reading fluency at that time. And it was something where like the DIBELS was really just kind of coming out in terms of the published format at that time. So we were using oral reading fluency, and we were using some of the CBM maze passages for comprehension, and the written expression measure. And also we had two different math measures. We had the computation measure and then the concepts and applications measure. And at that time, we were using the program that Lynn and Doug Fuchs had designed for CBM progress monitoring. But what we did was we actually charted everything on weekly charts.
Wow. Could you see a relationship in terms of acceleration between micro level measures and measures at the meta level? Would you look for that? Or I'm fascinated by how, especially if you're doing component composite analyses, then you could have a micro level. Let's say you're working on letter sounds, and that could affect something at the meta level.
We absolutely were. And that was actually sort of the early incarnations of this, where we were looking at the predictive validity of the precision teaching and sort of designing a framework in which to do amazingly high correlation between the two. One of the things that we could find is that if the meta level, if the student was flat in terms of their performance, if they were not making progress, we would go back and we would provided us a tool for a more fine-grained analysis to look at the precision teaching pinpoints and look at whether or not we were correctly identifying the component skills that we're going to be building to the composite, the application, and the contingency adduction that we were searching for. And so that was sort of, an early version of that. And there's been some great developments and actually some studies, some research that I'm going to be looking at this year in San Antonio, where they're now actually starting to more formally look at the correlation between the meta level and also now some of the macro level, some of the annual measures that they use to monitor progress. So it's really, they're all really intricately linked, that you keep it really user-friendly so that the assessment does not take away from the instruction. The precision teaching piece is the basis of the instructional model. So it's not that you're not going to be giving the Woodcock-Johnson once a week. I mean, you can't. There aren't enough versions of it, right? So it's a very seamless that way, where it does not take away from instruction at all to do this, and the measures are really highly representative indicators of student progress, but behavior samples.
That multi-level assessment that you have, that's still in use at a refined form?
It still is at use at Morningside Academy, and they have developed it. And so we had sort of an early incarnation of that, which was based on the tenets of the Morningside model. And they've now just taken it and run with it in terms of and in a fashion, tinkering with it and throwing out pieces of it that might have been a little clunky or not as important. So they're using it. And then right now, with my role as professor, I'm training graduate students. Interestingly enough, we're using it to design our assessment framework at the Chicago School to evaluate the learning of our graduate students in behavior analysis. And again, the cornerstone, the micro level, is precision teaching. And we're using things such as SAFMETs as our benchmarks at that level for student learning in graduate school. So it's actually not something that is limited to any one particular age range. So that's a new development on my end. And then on Morningside's end, they've really have advanced that system in a way to make it most useful there. So neat developments going on here.
Well, that's a nice segue into I have a number of questions I want to ask you, but talking about what you're doing now you're at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and you're working with up-and-coming students who are going to be school psychologists mainly. Is that correct?
Actually, it's the Department of Applied Behavior Analysis, so behavior analysts.
Behavior analysts. So mainly behavior analysts then?
Yes, it's a program where the competencies at the master's level are aligned with the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, and then we also have a doctoral program. It's a PsyD currently. We've actually just submitted an application to the Illinois Board of Higher Education for a PhD in behavior analysis. So it's an applied program that it really focuses on concepts and principles in behavior analysis, but how we can apply them. And what really drew me to the Chicago School was my interest in how we could harness the power of behavior analysis in education. And so there are a lot of really interesting projects going on in Chicago where we have behavior analysis in education in schools.
Mm-hmm. So I think I talked about this a few podcasts ago, where I know that the Chicago School, you are partnering with a school, and you are bringing lots of technology to the school. But that's about all I know about it. Could you talk a little bit about what's happening and how you're involved?
So a little bit about the name of the school is Garfield Park Preparatory Academy, and it is a school that is focused on behavior analysis and education. It's located in the west side of Chicago, in an area where the children have a lot of challenges in terms of what they're facing and coming to school, being ready, prepared to learn. And what we've found was that the model in terms of using behavior analysis and what we have to offer to harness educational progress was a really good fit. And so Dr. Denise Ross is the principal. She's also on the faculty at the Chicago School. She is a student of Doug Greer's from Columbia Teachers College, and it's a CABAS AIL implementation. And they've had great success thus far. They just actually completed the first year. Well, actually, the school year is winding down. This will be the first year, and it's an elementary school. And one of the things that I found to be so successful about this program is that they incorporate behavior analysis in a way where it's just embedded in the everyday language, even on the level of like the finance folks, for example, talk about shaping behavior. And there's amazing classroom management. The students are on task. They're academically engaged. But what we're finding actually, and one of my recommendations is that if we can fuse precision teaching and sort of direct instruction with AIL and CABAS, that to me is actually where the power lies. And so I'm actually eager to look at how we can, for example, one of the things we did in doing test prep for the third graders for the Illinois state exam was look at using a precision teaching wall chart, which is based essentially diagnostic prescriptive instruction, and how that really is consistent with learn units and an AIL model. So it's really an interesting project that has showing great progress and promise for these students, but is early, sort of early in the implementation. It's a really ambitious undertaking.
What are the big areas of growth that you see for the following year? I can imagine whenever you work in what you're talking about is having a big systems impact. So I can imagine with that systems impact, there are things that you do the first year that you get in there, and then you're like, okay, here's year 2. Here are the big things that we need to get better at, or maybe some things that we need to add and refine and so on. So what would those year 2 things be that you're thinking of?
Well, in terms of what I've seen, I think it is just that, where it's like they've got really built the infrastructure of the school really nicely. And then sort of the next thing to look at is what has worked in terms of the actual instruction in the curriculum, and how do you address the needs of all learners. And there's still some students who are showing difficulty in learning, and layering in, for example, Head Start reading has been something that is now being implemented there, and either using some direct instruction program and showing great interest in precision teaching. I think that is what I foresee happening for year 2 and 3 and beyond, is that they look with more specificity how to do the component composite analysis and fuse that with the current model in a way where it's not watering down one or the other.
Mm. Do your students get to, what's their role and involvement with the school?
That's actually one of the neatest parts of the project for us on the faculty, is that this is actually a tremendous practicum site for our students. So we have some doctoral students who are actually full-time teachers there. And in fact, some of them are certified teachers and are board certified behavior analysts. And they teach there, and they are completing their doctorate in the evening. If you know how that is.
Yeah.
But we also have many of our master students are completing their practicum there.
Now, Susan, how many, as a faculty member, you oversee doctoral students and master students?
Yes, I actually have both.
So how many, do you have students right now working in the school doing either dissertation or research?
I
theses? I would love to hear some of the interesting ideas and cool research that you're overseeing that you're a part of.
That is actually, for me, one of the most fun parts of my job, is that I get to do research with my students and come up with ideas and be able to really test them out using a single subject research design. And so I have, right now, I'm the chair for 8 master's theses. I think I have about 6 other students where I'm the second reader. And then I have about 5 dissertations that are just now getting underway. And I think the common thread for me in just about all of them is that they involve precision teaching or fluency-based instruction in one way or another, but really across a continuum of learning. And so one study and actually several of these students are presenting at the Association for Behavior Analysis Conference this year. One, for example, a student is looking at the use of SAF meds and comparing different schedules of practice. So we have the assumption that the daily practice is optimal, and in fact that is in the design of SAF meds. What she did is she looked at and used an alternating treatments design to look at twice weekly practice with SAF meds of behavior analytic terms versus daily practice, but equaling. And we looked at the rate of progress and the overall instructional efficiency. Mm-hmm. For these were actually therapists for CARD, so they were autism therapists. And she did find that the majority of the participants showed greater instructional efficiency with daily practice. But that's one.
Could you repeat? You were saying, what I didn't hear is you were telling me what you found out with the alternating treatment design, and you were comparing the daily and the twice a week.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And this is exciting. What we found was that we kind of expected it. We started with a hypothesis that daily practice was going to show greater instructional efficiency, but we really didn't know in terms of having this be empirically validated.
Sure.
And we've had students ask that and say, well, if I could just do it once a week, why should I do this every day? And so what we looked at was we compared using an alternating treatment design and found that for the majority of the participants in the study, they did show greater instructional efficiency with daily practice, and they actually reached aim much faster than if they did it twice a week, even though it's for the same number of minutes.
That is a cool study. Those are the kinds of things. I'm so happy to hear you're doing that, because we have so much in our field that we have this good clinical knowledge, I'll call it, but we don't study it and we don't necessarily publish it. So that kind of study is so valuable because, we take things for granted, but honestly, unless we share that information, it goes through peer review, it really just lies at the practitioner level.
That's right, and that's what I found too, actually, in working, kind of going in and out of different levels of service delivery of, sort of applied practice, which I have loved and just enjoyed tremendously, into an academic setting, is that, we don't always have the luxury when we're out in the field, when you're working in a school setting, there really isn't time, because that's one more learner that you can't get to and impact. And so we need to actually kind of work together. And actually, I've asked folks to tell me too, who work in precision teaching at sort of the ground level, to start keeping a journal of things that if we all had the time, what would you like to study? Because I now have a cadre of graduate students who are doing master's thesis in behavior analysis, and am really, really interested in looking at some of the questions that we all, we've seen anecdotal results for, but would benefit from having replication or putting through greater experimental rigor. So that's been really fun, and it's a challenge to actually design a study and pull it off, as you know. So the students work really hard to get that done.
Mm-hmm. And I do hope that you mention to your students, if they're looking for an outlet to submit articles to, we have the wonderful Journal of Precision Teaching and Acceleration, which would just welcome these charts and these projects that your students are doing.
Absolutely. That will be our next step, right, when we get back from San Antonio. They've got their presentations ready to go, and that's what I would like to see, is that we can actually share this information in a way where others can replicate, have it be truly technological. So,
Susan, what's your experience? So the experience that you have working with Morningside, with your students at Garfield, it seems like those would be situations where you have people that are receptive to using things like the standard acceleration chart. Do you have experience with public schools and others in using the standard acceleration chart and other types of behavioral? Well, let's just stick with that to start.
I do, actually. And it's actually one of my primary areas of interest is translational research and how we can actually gain acceptance and really have use of this amazing technology in American education and actually all over the world. But let's start with our own backyard. And I've seen great successes in using precision teaching and standard acceleration chart and the fluency-based instruction. And I've also seen areas in which it has not taken hold for a variety of reasons. And so one of the things I'm interested in doing is looking at effective consultation skills and having that be a discrete skill set for my students so that they become proficient in precision teaching and in behavior analysis, but that they also become really well trained to be good consultants. because you don't necessarily build both if you don't explicitly train for that. And so, some of the techniques of just, for example, start really small and gain a little small following of the folks who want to do it rather than trying to make everybody do it. And then when the other teachers see the success that the small group is having, they tend to want it then. I mean, that's been one really successful technique. The students are always the first ones to pick up on it. You can train a kindergartner to chart in a few minutes. It's usually harder to teach the adults because we have hangups, from our previous learning that blocks. And so, working with people about just doing something new. And I think the key is to really keep it simple and to respect the fact that we have to have technologies that are not going to be taking away from important instruction, that they understand that this is the key instruction and that the students need at that time, that the problem, for example, of, not passing the state exam or really advanced composite skills doesn't mean you work on inquiry-based learning skills. You may have to start with some of those component elements, but really show teachers how relevant this is, and doing it in a respectful way, I think is key. So I've had amazing experiences working in the public schools with teachers, but I've also seen the challenges that we face.
Those challenges, unfortunately, are only increasing in our day and time. And you are right, in most of the issues that I've always had problems with is this working with the teachers, working with other people that immediately they'll start having complaints. Well, we can't use that chart because kids will never be able to understand it. Really what they're saying probably is I can't understand it, therefore I don't want to teach my kid or something like that.
That's usually what they're saying, right? Yes. And actually I've had parents say that, oh, no, my child can't do that timed instruction. He'll become very nervous. He doesn't like the pressure. And then you try it out with that child and the kids love it. They love it. And so you really have to kind of get to, well, what really are they saying? What they're reporting to you is that they've had bad experiences with poor instruction. And the parents are trying to figure out what about it was poor instruction. It's usually not the fact that you were looking at accuracy plus ease of performance. And when you look at it from that framework, if you use a sports analogy or playing a violin or driving a car, actually I found that one to be good, is that, it really, anything important that to do, we really need to do fluently. And that's how I really started to make a little bit of headway with folks. But the key really is, I think, communicating relevance, because it's so different from what teachers are typically doing. And so they become nervous that, they're not getting to the real instruction. But what you find is that when they teach at a level that is not consistent with the student's instructional level, they're not making any progress. And what you end up seeing then is this within-child explanation for failure. We say it's because the child has autism. It's because the child has ADHD. Well, of course he can't learn to read. He has, he has dyslexia. Rather than saying, if we in fact made a change in our instruction and had the tools to engage in analysis and really pretty minimal resources. I mean, this is not an expensive undertaking compared to anything else we're doing in education. So I don't think it's necessarily an issue of having to throw a lot of money at it, but it is an issue of having the appropriate training and support. And we know, too, the power of hands-on coaching for teachers, to not go in and do a one-shot workshop. That's enough to get somebody excited to do something. It's not enough to implement a new method. And so really being able to work with folks to work out the bugs and the kinks, and also, when you use the multi-level assessment system, they can actually more clearly see the composite emerge. And that is also helpful, too, in, I think, communicating the value of what we're doing. Because they see them that kind of have that aha moment that doing, see-say sounds or, see-say math facts is actually going to be related to something that is problem solving, for example, or inferential reading comprehension.
I have a feeling once you get the results back from your school that you're working with now, your high stakes assessment, that's going to have a lot of people turning heads. At least that's what I would suspect, because
that would be my hope. Thanks.
Yeah. But I imagine you probably won't get those results back until sometime in the late summer. We'll have to communicate with you, and you're going to have, so I could share that with our listeners, because I'll be really interested to see that type of a change. Let me ask you this. What's next for you? What do you plan on doing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a good question. I mentioned how I really I sort of played with levels of service delivery. And Morningside Academy was working on kind of an individual child level and an applied setting. I've also had, private practice where I work with individual children and families, and have really loved that work and feel that was invaluable in terms of being able to be a better teacher. And so I think, given I'm just now finishing my first year as a professor at the Chicago School, and so I really feel like I've been on a really kind of steep learning curve and love what I'm doing. And so I would really like to see, I think one of the challenges that I would like to take on is sort of the continuing to look at the curriculum at the Chicago School and how it is aligning with our shared vision for how we're going to impact our schooling and education in the U.S. And so I really see myself continuing on in a sort of training the next generation in one way or another. But at the same time, I actually do continue to do some private practice work, and I think that helps to keep me connected. So I kind of like to go in and out of different levels of like individual child and family, systems level, but both in sort of an applied fashion, but then also at the university level for graduate training. So I think that's likely where I'll stay. Mm-hmm. In one way or another, but I'll let you know.
Yeah. Well, the way you describe it, it sounds like you have the best of all worlds.
I think the greatest things I can say too is that I love what I do, and just feel really fortunate to be part of this community. So I'm in good company.
Well, we're towards the end of our podcast, and is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or topics that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up?
I think we've had a great discussion, and I guess, let me think about that. I think probably the points I would want to really have as sort of our take-home message would be how we can use a component composite analysis to really teach anyone anything, that if you start at the right point, it's not a matter of if you provide a certain type of instruction, it's kind of more when, and that we really can teach to a diverse range of learners, that if we view learning along a continuum and then actually have a broad enough repertoire as teachers to know when to pull out what, that we won't be locked into published curriculum, that in having really focusing on effective instructional design, and as an element of that, using precision teaching to make sure we're building retention, endurance, stability, application, and induction of skills, that we really will see some big solutions, big impact in education that we have yet to realize. And so I think it's that the conceptual analysis and taking that piece, but figuring out a way to be effective consultants. And so getting the message out, to talk in sort of plain language, to listen to the folks that we work with, to show great respect for what they're doing, and to really harness the power of precision teaching by blending the two technologies, that I really think that we will see solutions in education that we've yet to realize. So that's what I think. It really lies in kind of why are we still so small in terms of our broad impact And I think also the other piece too, I guess I would reiterate is to not shy away from publication and finding the venue there that we work together as a group to publish our results and make sure that we have experimental rigor in what we're doing, but at the same time not losing sight or apologizing for our methods, which are absolutely sound. So I think that about sums it up.
Well, everything that you're saying, I feel like, I don't know, it's just amazing the things that you're saying. You say so much better than I do, but I agree with everything that you said, and I know that our listeners will find value, and particularly talking about how we can connect to other people. A lot of listeners and people that are involved or just at the periphery and interested in precision teaching, I think they can see what we have to offer, but the questions always are like, how do I get this for my child, and how do I get my school to do this? And your responses and your take on it provide a very nice, direct way of how we can make that next step of, okay, we know we have something here, but how do we get other people to use it? So I really appreciate what you've had to share with us tonight.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll have you back again in the future if you're willing, and we can talk more about, there's a lot of, this podcast always goes so fast, but we can talk more about your research, more about your what's happening with your schools, and the other good things that we talked about tonight.
That sounds great. We can consider this to be part one of our discussion then, and then there'll be some follow-up and in the progress I think we're all making. That's what we should do.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining the Precision Teaching Podcast. And we are back. As I said, Doug, that was going to be a great interview, and it was a great interview.
Yes, sir, Ray.
Well, we're towards the end of our podcast. Do you have any nuggets of information that you would like to share with everyone before we say goodbye?
I guess this is kind of the beginning of getting the summer bug. So everyone, we'll talk to you next month, but I hope your summer starts out great these next few weeks.
Okay. Good sage advice.
Yeah.
On behalf of Doug Kosowitz, I'm Rick Cabina, and thank you for listening to the Precision Teaching Podcast.